Will be about networks, a symposium about networks organized by the Koninklijke Nederlandse Academie van Wetenschappen. It's a pleasure to see you all here. My name is Frank den Hollander. I'm a mathematics professor at Leiden University, and I will be acting as chair of this evening. Networks are really everywhere. They are, in some sense, the backbone of our society. The World Wide Web, computing, traffic, communication, energy. Much of what we do today depends on networks. We really rely on them. And you could think of them as a kind of big 24/7 big experiment that we are running all the time. And networks also pose enormous challenges. How do they come to be? How do they fit together? How do they really function? And what about robustness? What about security? What about privacy? So these are all big questions that we try to think about, and that I hope that tonight you will get a few answers. And networks is a topic really that we will still be talking about 20, 30 years from now. It's not a modegrill, it is really something that will keep us busy for a long time. And also in the Netherlands, there's a lot of activity in trying to understand the properties and the behavior and everything that is around networks. And in particular, one of the activities is that we have a national program which is funded by the Ministry of OCW, where we try to address some of these big challenges, and Professor Michel Mantjes from the University of Amsterdam is heading that team, and it's really spread out all over the country. So it's a wonderful thing. So this evening we're going to have 4 speakers. Each of them will highlight different aspects of networks for you. They will each be speaking about 25 minutes, and after the first 2 lectures we'll have a brief discussion, and also after the next 2 lectures we'll have another discussion about the content of these presentations. And this is very much an interactive evening, so you're really invited to ask questions, to participate, maybe make a few remarks. So please do, and we'll be very happy. Okay, so Monique, it will be so I can organize our first speaker, Monique Laurent. She is working at the Center for Mathematics and Computer Science here in Amsterdam in the Networks and Optimization Research Group, and she's also professor at Tilburg University, and she has worked a lot on problems of algorithms optimization, and she will tell us about that, ordering data with network algorithms.
Okay, thank you very much, Frank, for the kind introduction. So, as you just said, networks are ubiquitous. We are constantly using networks in our daily life, be it for communicating, for traveling. You may think of infrastructure networks such as railroads or roads. Here you see a network which is depicting the KLM flight routes in Europe. Here networks are also used to draw cartographic maps, like these nice metro maps from Paris and Amsterdam. Of course, networks are also used to depict interrelationships in a group. Like here we have these food web networks which representing the who is eating who relationships in this group of animals. Social networks have already been mentioned, they are very important. And the next lecture by Nelly Litvak will be about social networks. Networks are also widely used in biology, in particular to model diffusion of epidemics. And this will be the topic of the lecture by Jacobi and Carstens. Finally, we will have a third lecture which is about how to predict failures in energy networks. That will be the last lecture by Stella Capodistria. So, in the rest of my lecture, what I want to discuss is some basic or some network optimization problems. So first of all, how should we think about a network? For us, a network is going to be a very simple object. We may just think about it as a collection of nodes, also called vertices, and edges. What are edges? These are just some links which you are placing between some selected pairs of nodes. So on this example, I have, we can see the two red nodes, A and B, they are connected by an edge. You may also say, I will also use this word, that they are adjacent or they are neighbors of each other. On the other hand, the two blue nodes, C and D, are not connected by an edge. So there are many algorithmic questions you may ask about networks. Probably one of the most simple ones you can think of is you are given two nodes, A and B, in the network, and you want to find the shortest path from A to B. So what is a path? It's exactly what you think it should be. So you want to travel from A to B by traversing edges. And you want to do this using as few edges as possible. Of course, a naive approach would be, I'm going to list all the possible paths from A to B, because after all, this is a finite object, so I can just list all of them. But this is not possible, because the number of paths can be very large if the number of nodes is becoming large in your network. We will see this is a phenomenon known as combinatorial explosion, and I will tell more about this in a few slides. So this is not an option, but fortunately, in the case of the shortest path, there is another strategy which we can follow, and which is actually very simple. We are going to use network search. And more precisely, we are going to use what is known as breadth-first search. So this is a search strategy which basically follows the following principle. We are going to visit the nodes one by one, and the rule is that when we visit a node, after that we should immediately visit all the neighbors of that node. And after that, all the neighbors of the neighbors. Let me just show how this works on this simple example. So we start the search at the node A, and then the next thing we do, we are going to visit all the neighbors, in other words, all the vertices connected by an edge to A. So let's start. We first visit node 1, then we get the second neighbor, the third neighbor, the fourth neighbor. As you can see here, we have visited all the neighbors of node A. So let's, to clarify, let's color them red. And by our construction, those nodes are connected by an edge to A, so they are at distance 1 to A. And now we visit the neighbors of A. So we started the first vertex visited, which is vertex 1. So we discover a new node, 5, another node, 6. Now we have searched all the neighbors of 1, so we move to node 2. We found a new neighbor, 7, a second, another neighbor, 8. We are done with 2. We move to 3. Well, 3, the neighbors of 3 have already been visited, so we move to 5, and we discover one more node. The green nodes, by construction, are at distance 2 from the root node A. We go on and we visit the neighbors of the green nodes. 5 doesn't have any new neighbor because all of them are already visited, so we move to 6. We find a new node, 10, second node, and we move to 7, and we visit B. The last 3 visited nodes, we color them blue, and by construction, they are at distance 3 from A. So we see that B is blue, it is at distance 3, and by backtracking, it's very easy to see how to find a shortest path from A to B, and it is indeed using 3 edges. So this is a very simple algorithm, and it's a fast algorithm, because the only thing we are doing is traveling through the edges and the nodes. So the time complexity is going to be linear in the size of the graph. So this is a nice algorithm, but as I described it just works if all the edges have the same length. Now, in practice, you may want to have distances on the edges, which could represent a kilometric distance between 2 nodes. And then the strategy which I just described doesn't work. But Dijkstra introduced a more sophisticated graph search which solves the shortest length path problem. So now we want to find a path whose total length is as short as possible. And this is essentially the search I just described, but you should add another ingredient, which is the following. You visit the nodes, and when you are at a node, you should also keep track of what was the length of the shortest path from A to that node so far. And you update this function throughout the execution of the algorithm. Dijkstra algorithm is very nice, and this is also, So here is the shortest length path from A to B. So you see, you add these numbers on the edges, you get a path of total length 2 plus 3 times 1, that's 5. And you can easily convince yourself that this is the shortest path you can do. So Dijkstra algorithm is also a fast algorithm. It runs almost linearly in the number of edges. So this is a fast algorithm. So this shortest path algorithm is used, very widely used, and the first kind of application you may think of is of course for a navigation system. When you are searching your way, or like here, you are constantly solving shortest path problem. But the shortest path problem also arises as a subroutine for more complicated, more sophisticated computational tasks. So this is a basic, widely used computational tool. So just to show you, so this is a paper of Dijkstra in '59, which he wrote when he was working at CWI, while actually in those days this was the Mathematisches Zentrum, but nowadays this is CWI at the Upsilon Science Park. Here I just show you Dijkstra on the left in front of Mathematisches Zentrum, and on the right you see how CWI nowadays looks like. Okay, let me move to a second network optimization problem. So this is known as a traveling salesman problem. Maybe some of you have heard about it already. So in this problem, we have locations and locations. If we look at this example, we have the 12 capitals of the Dutch provinces, and there are distances between the capitals. And the question you ask yourself is, you want to travel, you want to do a round trip through all the location, which is as small as possible, which is as short as possible. So say you start at Groningen on top, and you have to decide in which order are you going to visit the other cities and come back to Groningen, and doing this as economic as possible. So in which order should you visit the end locations? So, for example, for example, when you go on a city trip in the morning, you have to plan how am I going to visit all the attractions I want to visit today, and you don't want to be efficient, so you want to walk as little as possible, maybe, and then you are solving an instance of traveling salesman problem. Maybe not to optimality, but this is a problem you are confronted with. So again, a naive option could be, I'm just going to try out all the solutions. I list all the orders, and I compute the length, and I pick the shortest one. Well, this is not really a possible viable way, because if we look, we can easily count how many possible solutions there are, and it's half n minus 1 factorial. And in this table, I show you how this number is growing. So for 12 cities, the number of possible solutions is already almost 20 million. If we go to the next values of n, then we see how the number is growing. You see, it's really growing very steep. So if you look for 50 cities, well, it's an astronomical number, and it's out of question of listing all the possibilities. It's impossible, simply. So this phenomenon of this high growth of the number of solutions is known as combinatorial explosion. So as I just said, it's out of question to examine all the possible solutions and to pick the best one. So what to do? So we already had this phenomenon of combinatorial explosion. I didn't show it to you, but I told you that it could be that in a network you have many paths from A to B, so you wouldn't check them all, but yet there was an alternative way of attacking the problem. So maybe for the traveling salesman problem it's the same, there is maybe another way of attacking the problem. Unfortunately, as of today, it is still not known whether there is a fast algorithm for solving the traveling salesman problem. Nobody knows if such an algorithm exists. And actually it is one of the 7 millennium problems to decide whether there exists a fast algorithm to solve the traveling salesman problem. So these 7 millennium problems were set in, by the Clay Mathematics Institute in 2000. And the point is that if somebody comes up with a fast algorithm for the traveling salesman problem, it's not going only to give a solution for that problem, but it's also going to give a solution for a whole bunch of other optimization problems which are hard as of today, and we don't know how to solve them. So this problem plays a crucial role within the complexity landscape. But nevertheless, it's a problem which has many real-life applications. So most notably in logistics. So you have a truck which has to deliver goods along a number of locations, so this is an instance of a traveling salesman problem. Maybe another application which you may be less familiar with. So for the design of computer chips, there is one step where a machine has to drill holes in the printed circuit board, because then you can make connection between several plates in the computer chip. And there are many holes to be drilled, so you want to program the machine so that it goes from hole to hole in the most economical way. So this is an instance of the traveling salesman problem too. So there is a lot of research done about this, and people have come up with methods which sometimes are able to solve some problems at optimality. So in 1991, researchers have been able to solve a problem with 2,000 cities, with 2,300 cities at optimality. And the last record actually is an instance of that optimality with more than 85,000 cities. But there is a cost to this. So the resolution of this problem at optimality was done with several computers in parallel, and if you add up the computing time on all the computers, it adds up to 24 days of computation. So this is a traveling salesman problem, and so this is a problem, a very interesting problem, and I just wanted to show you two of the books. So on the left, you see the first book about this problem, which actually has two Dutch co-authors, the mathematicians Jan-Karel Lenstra and Alexander Rinneukhan. And on the right, you have a more recent book about this problem, which is a very nice coffee table book, because it tells a lot about the history of the problem, applications, and it's a very leisurely, written in a very leisurely manner. So, to summarize, the traveling salesman problem is a special ordering problem. In which order am I going to visit the cities, which as of today doesn't have a fast algorithm. Now I want to talk about another ordering problem, which has to deal with ordering data which are given by their pairwise similarities. And unlike the traveling salesman problem, it's again an ordering problem, but as we will see, there is a fast algorithm for this ordering problem. So I should tell you what is this ordering problem. How do we order data? Let me do this at the hand of an application to archaeology. So, Sir Williams Matthew Flinders Petrie was a British archaeologist in the second half of the 19th century, who was very famous for his archaeological discoveries in Egypt and Palestine. So in particular, he discovered large graveyards, and he set himself the task of defining the chronological, dating the graves he discovered, but in chronological order. So to be clear, in those days, the modern techniques of absolute dating, like carbon-14, didn't exist. But what Petrie wanted to do is to find which grave came before which. So he wanted to, and what he achieved is he pioneered a sequencing method for the graves, which he based on looking at the objects he found in the graves. And in particular, he looked at the potteries found in the grave, because there were a lot of potteries in all the graves he discovered. So here you see one of his books. So you see the potteries are pictured here. So Petrie grouped them into groups. Like here, I think we see 9 groups. So like on top, you see a class of potteries which he calls Class B, which contains all the black-topped potteries. And if you go to the line from the bottom, the third line, you see the Class D, which consists of the decorated potteries. So all the potteries which are decorated. And what Petrie did is he selected a number of graves, and for each of the graves, he made a paper slip. And here we see the paper slips, which are, you can see them at the Petrie Museum in London, I think. So for each grave, he made a paper slip, and on the paper slip, he recorded, so he had his 9 groups of potteries. So given a grave, he looked at each type of pottery, and he recorded on the paper slip whether the pottery was present or not in the grave. So his sequencing method is record which potteries are present in the grave, and then try to order the grave according to the stylistic characteristic of the potteries. So concretely speaking, what Petrie tried to do is, now he had all the paper slips, and he tried to order the paper strips. And the goal was that if you look at the type of potteries, then he wanted to see a smooth transition from a pottery is not yet present, then it becomes present, and then it disappears again. So the guiding principle for Petrie was that, as you may think of a fashion, so a pottery was not present, then it appeared, it became fashionable, it stays for a while, and then it disappeared again, it ran out of fashion. So this was the approach of Petrie for sequencing, finding the chronological ordering of graves. A number of years later, a mathematician, Robinson, enriched the approach of Petri. So he didn't only, instead of only looking whether a pottery is present or not, what Robinson did, he also looked at the frequency of the potteries in the grave. And he used these frequencies to define a similarity measure between two graves. So if we look, for instance, here we have a small array of numbers, and this array of numbers, this is coming from the paper of Robinson, this array of numbers shows the similarities between the graves. So we have an array of numbers which is indexed by 8 graves, let's say, and if you see on top, for instance, you see number 6, which is a similarity between grave 2A and grave 3A. And then the approach of Robinson is, let's try to order the grave in such a way that if two graves are very similar, then they should be close to each other in the order. In other words, we want to find an ordering having the property that if A comes before B, which in turn comes before C, then it should be the case that AB are more similar than AC and BC are more similar than AC. If such an ordering exists, it's called nowadays a Robinson ordering. And the problem of trying to find such an ordering is known nowadays as a seriation problem. So if we go back to the array of numbers, so let's call it now similarity matrix. So having such, if the ordering of the matrix would be a Robinson ordering, this would translate into the property that when you move, let's take a row, and when you move in the row towards the main diagonal, the numbers should increase. And the same when you take a column and you move down towards the main diagonal, the numbers should increase. So we see here that this is almost happening. So when you go from 1 to 5, it's increasing. When you go from 4 to 11, it's increasing. But it's not always increasing. So a few places where this is wrong, it goes wrong. So here it goes wrong, here it goes wrong, here it goes wrong. So the ordering here is almost Robinson. There are a few places which are wrong. But this is the basic idea. You want to order a matrix in order to get rid of these wrong places. So the seriation problem is not only used for archaeology, it's also used for a wide variety of other problems. Every time when you have an underlying linear structure which you are trying to find. So for instance, for ranking problems or for DNA sequencing. So let me just say a few words about how you would apply this to DNA sequencing. So there you have a long DNA strand, which you cannot sequence at a time because it's too long. So what biologists do, they clone it, so they get a number of clones of it, and then they chop it into small pieces. And then the small pieces, you can sequence them one by one, but then you get a number of sequenced small fragments, and you have to reconstruct from them the original long DNA strand. And then what you can do is you take the small pieces and you look at the overlap. If maybe they don't overlap at all, and then the similarity is 0, or maybe they overlap a lot, and then the similarity is high. But from these small fragments, you build a similarity matrix, and then the name of the game is that you try to reorder this similarity matrix so that it helps you to find the original DNA sequence. So here is a very large matrix. The entries are color-coded, so from blue to red. Blue means a small entry, 0. Red means a large entry, to 800. And the question is, can we find a Robinson ordering? And the answer is yes, because here I have reordered the matrix using a Robinson ordering, and you see that the matrix now becomes much nicer, and it has indeed this property that entries are increasing along a row and along a column when moving towards the diagonal. How to find such a Robinson ordering? We have already argued that it's not possible to list all the orderings because of combinatorial explosion. But we are going to cope with this by using network search. But then I have to tell you how to get a matrix how to get a network out of a matrix. So here is a small similarity matrix. Let's label the rows and the columns by letters from A to G, and we build a network in this way. The 4 labelings becomes the nodes, and you put an edge precisely when the entry is non-zero in the matrix. And you put a weight to the edges. So between A and G, you find the entry 2, so you put weight 2, and I color-code it by red. Between A and D, I have an entry 1, so I get a weight 1, and I color-code it with green. And when the weight is 0, like between A and B, I don't put an edge. So there is a one-to-one correspondence between a matrix and a network with weights on the edges. So this is not the Robinson ordering, but this is a Robinson ordering. How to find the Robinson ordering? Now we have some hands. We can put our hands because now we can work on the network. So we're going to use network search. But now the edges have weights, so we cannot use immediately breadth first search, but we use an extension to networks with edge weights. So this is called similarity first search. And it goes as follows. We start with an input ordering, say the natural ordering from A to G. And this ordering we use to break ties. When we don't know how to move, we look at the input ordering to make our decision. First node we visit is node A, because this is, too much. We visit first node A because this is the first node in our input ordering. And now we are going to visit the nodes. We put first the nodes which have the highest similarity to A. So if you look at A, it has a weight 2 to G, it's red, so G comes first and it gets into a red box. Then D and E are green, to have a green connection to A, so they come in the green box. And finally, B, C, F don't have an edge to A, so they go to a blue box. The order of the boxes now is fixed, but what is not yet fixed is the order of the nodes within a box. Second step, we visit the next node in the ordering, which is G, and it turns out that it doesn't change the boxes, just change the color of the boxes. At this step, we don't know which one we should visit next between D and E, so we look at the input ordering, and D comes before E, so we decide to visit first D. So, and now we look at these nodes, BCF, we see that among BCF, B and F have similarity 1 to D, so they go to a green box, and C doesn't have an edge to D, so it goes to a blue box. We iterate, and at the last step we visit E, and now the boxes just contain one node, so we have an order. And we are done. With this round of the similarity first search, we are done. We have found our output ordering. So in this example, this is actually already a Robinson ordering, but this is because it's a very special example. In general, you would have to iterate this algorithm. So what does it mean, iterating? It means you take your output ordering, you reverse it, and you use it as your next input ordering, and you iterate the whole similarity first search. You get a new output ordering, and you may have to iterate again and again and again. But when can you stop? Does it ever give you the right answer? And the answer is given by these two results. This is my last slide. So with this first result of Cornell, we looked at the case of a similarity matrix with two entries, 0 and 1. So only 0 and 1 in your matrix. And then what Cornell showed is that in 3 iterations of the algorithm I just showed you, you get the answer. You look at the third output ordering, either it's Robinson, you are happy, or it's not Robinson, and then it gives you a proof that actually stop to search. There exists no Robinson ordering. And this is a fast algorithm running in at most n square step. Together with Matteo Similarity, my PhD student then, we looked at the case of an arbitrary similarity matrix, so with any entries in the matrix. And say the matrix has size n, then the result is that you just need to do n minus 1 iterations. So after n minus 1 iteration, either you find the Robinson ordering, or if it is not, this is a proof that no Robinson ordering exists. And again, this is a fast algorithm. So I hope I've been able to convey to you that some simple-looking network optimization problem may yet yield to interesting and challenging results at the interface between mathematics and computer science. Thank you very much for your attention.